Being a member of the legendary comic pair Laurel and Hardy, Stan Laurel had a special talent for making people laugh, and his charisma endures to this day. But his life was filled with struggles that most people were unaware of, despite his giggles. Stan's life wasn't simple, filled with both career struggles and devastating personal losses. Losing his kid to the terrible clutches of death was one of the most heartbreaking blows he ever experienced. Before we go into the sorrow and loss, though, let's pause to reflect on the wonderful times in Stan Laurel's life, the joy he provided to millions of people, and the whole image of the guy who created the humor. On June 16, 1890, Arthur Stanley Jefferson, better known as Stan Laurel, was born in Ulverston, Lancashire, at his grandparents' home. His parents, Margaret, an actress, and Arthur J. Jefferson, a traveling actor and theater manager, were too busy acting to care for a kid on the move. Thus, Stan grew up with his grandparents, George and Sarah Metcalf, and became very comfortable in Ulverston. Stan was doing more than just playing with toys. He was taking in Ulverston's sights and noises, going to Holy Trinity Church with his grandparents, and seemingly becoming very addicted to Gillam's General Store's treacle toffee. Just across the street from his grandparents' house, at the Hippodrome Theater, Stan's passion for the theater began. His parents played in a theater with a wooden canvas ceiling. There, his father would develop several of the plays for which he would become renowned. Thus, Stan wasn't only playing in the streets as he grew up, he was becoming familiar with the theater's charm by attending performances. Although the Hippodrome tragically burned down in 1910, Stan sailed for America that year. However, it will be covered in a later film. Stan lived in North Shields for a while, with his grandmother Sarah Metcalf, prior to enrolling in institutions such as the King's School and King James I Grammar School. His family eventually relocated to Glasgow, where Stan's father was the manager of the Metropole Theatre. Stan truly got into the performance bug at this point. He entered the world of theatre at the age of 16, playing his first paid performance at Glasgow's Panopticon. He most likely understood at this point that it was a pretty nice bargain to get paid to make others laugh. At the age of 20, Stan became a member of Fred Carnot's group in 1910, taking on the stage name Stan Jefferson. Because his fellow group member wasn't just any person, it was Charlie Chaplin. This is when things really started to get interesting. Indeed, the two future icons were out and about doing slapstick humor, and probably attempting to outsmart one another. Stan even had the opportunity to work as Chaplin's assistant. The rest is comedic history. They both boarded the same ship to the United States. Stan enrolled for military duty during the World War, but he was given a free pass since he was deaf and a resident alien. But nothing was going to stop him from becoming a great comedian. Stan wasn't content to wait for the next great thing when the Carnot Ensemble broke up in the spring of 1914. He joined forces with Edgar Hurley and his wife Ethel, two other former Carnot performers, to form the Three Comiques. They changed their name to the Keystone Trio, a reference to the well-known Keystone Police who were popular in comedy at the time, on the suggestion of their booking agent. Stan began tinkering with his persona during this stage, imitating his longtime friend Charlie Chaplin. The Hurleys, meantime, started portraying Mabel Normand and Chester Conklin, two silent cinema stars. The group parted up after a successful tour from February to October of 1915. Stan then embarked on new experiences. Stan joined forces with Alice Cook and Baldwin Cook to form the Stan Jefferson Trio between 1916 and 1918. This collaboration went beyond the stage. Baldwin and Alice would become longtime companions. However, Stan met Oliver Hardy, another significant character, in 1921. Though it wasn't yet the renowned collaboration we all know and love, they collaborated briefly on the silent short The Lucky Dog. During this period, Stan also met actress May Dahlberg, who said that the 13 letters in his stage name Stan Jefferson were bad. Stan changed his stage name to Laurel and started again, just like any other good superstitious performer. Soon after, Laurel had an offer of $75 per week to feature in 2 genuine comedies, which he seized. Universal gave him a contract when he finished his debut movie Nuts in May. but as is sometimes the case in Hollywood, the deal didn't last long. It was cancelled due to a studio restructure, but Stan was unfazed. Among the several movies in which he and May co-starred was the 1922 satire Mud and Sand, which had its own unique brand of absurdity. Stan signed a deal with Joe Rock to feature in 12 two-reel comedies by 1924, demonstrating his complete commitment to the movie industry. There was a peculiar clause in this agreement. It was forbidden for May Dahlberg to be in any of these movies. Joe Rock thought that Stan was being held back by her temperament. Rock thus provided May a monetary settlement and a one-way trip back to her home country of Australia in 1925, when she began to interfere with Stan's business. Their collaboration came to an end when May agreed. Stan's career, however, was only beginning. Between 1924 and 1925, Stan produced a number of comedies, included Being Jailed and Mispronouncing Mandarin. Even though he didn't star in any of them, he had directed or co-directed 10 silent shorts by 1925. Nonetheless, Hardy, his eventual comedy sidekick, did feature in 3 of these movies. Yes, Madam Mystery, Nanette and Wandering Papas. The gears were turning for Laurel and Hardy to become one of the greatest comedy teams of all time, even if their partnership wasn't quite a force yet. The next significant development in Stan Laurel's career was his signing with Hal Roach Studios. He first intended to concentrate on writing and directing, and in 1925 he even directed the movie Yes, Yes, Nanette. Oliver Hardy, his future comedy partner, played Babe Hardy in the movie, but life had other ideas. Hardy, who starred in the Hal Roach Studios comedy All Stars, was hospitalized after a kitchen accident the same year. Stan was asked to fill in and play the lead in the movie Get 'Em Young since Hardy was out of commission. The situation changed at this point. The magic began to develop when Stan and Oliver started sharing the screen. Laurel and Hardy were a well-known on-screen couple by the beginning of 1927. They appeared in a number of short films, such as With Love and Hisses, Slipping Wives and Duck Soup. Unquestionably, the two had chemistry, and the people at Roach Studios quickly saw how the audience reacted to their antics. Seeing the promise, director Leo McCarey started combining them more often, and later that year the renowned Laurel and Hardy series was born. With a strong output of shorts like The Battle of the Century, Should Married Men Go Home, Two Tars, Be Big and Big Business, the group swiftly rose to prominence as one of the most popular comedic groups of the silent cinema era. Even the switch to talkies in 1929 didn't slow them down since they had such a natural pace. They debuted in a feature film later that year as part of the review scene in the 1929 Hollywood Review after their first sound picture, Unaccustomed as We Are, was a success. They appeared in the all-color Technicolor musical The Rogue Song the next year. With Pardon Us, their first full-length starring film, released in 1931, Laurel and Hardy achieved yet another significant milestone, and they continued the trend, producing shorts and features until 1935. They even won an Academy Award for Best Short Subject for their 1932 short, Music Box. Comedy gold. They were slaying it. However, as anybody who has ever reached a high note is aware, perfection is a fleeting state. For Stan Laurel and Hal Roach, things became a little difficult in the 1930s. A significant disagreement resulted from the two's falling out over contract concerns, had various contracts with different expiration dates for Hardy and Laurel. This implied that Hardy's contract was still in effect, even if Laurel's was. For the 1939 movie Zenobia, Roach retained Hardy at the studio and partnered him with other comedians such as Harry Langdon. The Hardy Family, a new television series starring Hardy and Patsy Kelly, was even considered. This was not acceptable to Laurel. Thus he filed a lawsuit against Roach for breach of contract. Laurel finally returned to Roach Studios once the court struggle ended, but their relationship was never quite the same. Both Laurel and Hardy would soon come to the conclusion that it was time to permanently leave Roach. By 1941, Laurel and Hardy had agreed to a 5-year 10-film production deal with 20th Century Fox. To Laurel's astonishment, however, the two were only employed as actors, no artistic influence on the movie's composition, production or editing. The creative freedom they were accustomed to at Roach was a long cry from this. Nevertheless, the movies were successful, and Laurel and Hardy were given greater latitude as their fame increased. They gradually started including their own content and personalizing these movies. They would go on to become one of the most famous comedic duos in entertainment history, but tragedy struck in 1957, just as their star was glimmering brighter than ever. Half of one of the most adored comedy duos in history perished with Oliver Hardy on August 7, 1957. Stan Laurel was taken aback by the news. Laurel had lost his artistic collaborator, closest friend, and the one person who actually understood their peculiar, beautiful rhythm. In a silent, sorrowful moment, he murmured, "Baby would understand even though he was too sick to go to the burial." And you would know that was most likely the case if you knew anything about their relationship. However, Hardy's passing signified more than simply the termination of a business collaboration. With that, Laurel's career as a performer came to an end. He was offered the chance to go back on stage and film, but he declined them all. He just didn't want to work without Hardy, not because he was arrogant or obstinate. Without Babe, the act wasn't the same for Laurel. To be honest, nothing was ever quite the same again. Even though the loss was extremely difficult, Laurel had to deal with many tragedies. There was enough upheaval, drama, and grief in his private life. The world witnessed a man who made them chuckle. They were blind to the extent of his suffering when the spotlight faded. Behind Stan Laurel's famous bowler hat and comedic genius was a guy whose private life sometimes resembled a sad melodrama rather than a comedy. Laurel was silently bearing the burden of loss, controversy, and intense personal grief, while viewers chuckled at his on-screen antics. The tragic death of his baby boy was the worst of all. The history of Laurel's relationships alone reads like a soap opera. Although he and May Dahlberg, his first lover, lived together as common-law spouses from 1919 until 1925, they were never legally married. In his early career, Dahlberg was crucial. She even contributed to the creation of the stage name Stan Laurel. However, producer Joe Rock purchased Laurel a one-way ticket back to Australia after determining that Dahlberg was impeding her career. The drama continued after she left. In 1937, more than 10 years later, while going through a challenging divorce with his second wife, Dahlberg returned to the United States and filed a lawsuit against Laurel for financial assistance. Even if the lawsuit was resolved out of court, the public spectacle was nothing compared to what transpired in May 1930. It was just one more bitter note in an already chaotic personal symphony. Stanley Robert Laurel, a boy, was the second child born to Laurel's first wife, Lois Nielsen. He was 2 months early. Tragically, baby Stanley passed away 9 days after his birth, despite the couple's best efforts to hold on to hope. For a guy who dedicated his professional life to making people laugh and smile, this loss was a personal and heartbreaking loss. One that surely left a severe scar, but which Laurel never discussed much in public. No amount of applause or comedy could make the anguish go away. A convoluted string of weddings and remarriages continues to dominate Laurel's married life. He married Virginia Ruth Rogers in 1935 following his 1934 divorce with Lois. That was swiftly dismantled. Although Lois wasn't interested in rekindling their romance, he acknowledged that he still had affections for her. After that, there was Ilyana Shuvalova, whose turbulent marriage ended with accusations as outrageous as Laurel trying to kill her in the backyard. In 1940, that marriage fell apart. Laurel then wedded Virginia Ruth Rogers, maybe out of habit, but they divorced again in 1946. He married Ida Kateva Raphael that same year, and she would be at his side till the end of his life. Stan Laurel continued to appear on television smiling despite all of the public scandals, personal tragedies, and divorces that made headlines. However, that smile belied a guy who had suffered more than his share of hardships. Like the movies that made him famous, his life was tragically depicted in black and white, losing a child, falling in love repeatedly, and finally losing his closest creative collaborator. Stan Laurel quietly left the limelight as the illustrious Laurel and Hardy collaboration came to an end, but he did not lose the affection of his followers, or the respect of his contemporaries. Even though he lived in lowly circumstances, his legacy grew even after his performance days were over. For his innovative work in the realm of movie humor, Laurel received an honorary Oscar from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in 1961, acknowledging his enormous contribution to comedy. Despite being too weak to be present at the event, Laurel's impact was evident. Danny Kaye accepted the prize on behalf of Bob Hope, who presented it. A heartfelt act that demonstrated how much Laurel was still adored and respected in the entertainment industry. Even though Laurel starred in almost 190 movies, he spent his latter years in a modest, unassuming apartment in Santa Monica's Oceana Apartments rather than a mansion in Hollywood. He had not been spoiled by celebrity. In truth, Laurel often took fan calls himself and kept his number in the public directory. He never lost the humility that had won him millions of admirers, and he took satisfaction in responding to fan messages. He may just answer the phone and start talking like an old friend if you were fortunate enough to call him. He was frequently sought after as a mentor by comedians who wanted to follow in his footsteps. In addition to paying him a visit, Jerry Lewis used Laurel's influence in The Bellboy. Dick Van Dyke had a similar experience, naming the primary character Stanley and adding a character based on Laurel performed by Bill Richmond. Van Dyke, a young performer, contacted Laurel after finding his number and received an invitation to come. Van Dyke later honored him by playing him in a Dick Van Dyke Show episode. These were not only expressions of adoration, they were recognitions that their work carried on Laurel's comical heritage. Laurel declined an appearance in It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, which director Stanley Kramer offered her alongside comedic icons Buster Keaton and the Three Stooges. He apparently didn't want to be seen in old age and was insistent about never appearing on TV without Hardy. He remained steadfast in his devotion to his deceased lover. It was still intended to be a subtle reference, a backdrop image of a double sitting in an antique convertible while wearing Laurel's trademark bowler hat. However, even that little homage was eventually changed, and Jack Benny, who donned Laurel's hat in the final edit, got the cameo. Stan Laurel never really left the stage, even though he may have moved away from the camera in the end. Laurel remained a timeless presence in the world of laughing, quiet, kind, and continuously searching for the ideal joke until the very end, thanks to the comics he trained, the fans he thrilled, and the classic films he left behind. And talking of the end, Stan Laurel lived a tranquil life in his last years, away from the attention that used to follow him everywhere. By the middle of the 1960s, his health was beginning to deteriorate. Doctors performed a number of tests in January 1965 after discovering an infection on the roof of his mouth. Then he had a heart attack in February. At the age of 74, he died quietly in his recliner a few days later on the 23rd. Not much fanfare. A silent farewell from a man who once made the world laugh without uttering a single word, without a spectacular conclusion. Church of the Hills in Los Angeles hosted his funeral. Although it wasn't a huge Hollywood extravaganza, it was packed with individuals who actually thought highly of him. The eulogy was delivered by Dick Van Dyke, who had become close to Laurel in his senior years. He was always more than a comic hero in Van Dyke's eyes. He regarded him as a mentor and friend. Also present was Buster Keaton, who was honoring someone he thought was exceptional. Despite his passing, Stan's impact persisted, and he was laid to rest in Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills Cemetery. His legacy with Hardy, the fun they shared, and the model they established for all subsequent comedic duos were more significant than his 190 films or notoriety.